My wife and I hadn't slept together in 8 months, so when she suddenly started caring about how she looked for conference week, I noticed right away. It wasn't just the dresses or the makeup or the way she stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. It was the energy behind it. The same woman who had spent months acting too drained to reach for me suddenly had something to look forward to. Her name is Megan. We've been married 10 years. I'm 40, she's 36, and until last year, I would have told you we were the kind of couple who had made it through the hardest part. Not perfect. Not one of those fake smiling couples on vacation pages pretending every photo is spontaneous. But solid. Familiar. Built. We knew each other's rhythms. We knew how to recover after arguments. We knew how to share a house without stepping on each other all the time. I thought that meant we were safe. Then 8 months passed without us touching each other in any real way, and somehow I still kept finding reasons not to panic. At first it was easy to explain. Megan's job had been getting heavier for over a year. She worked in corporate events and client relations for a healthcare software company, which meant there was always some new rollout, some networking dinner, some emergency presentation, some executive visit that turned her phone into a second heartbeat. She came home tense, distracted, and mentally somewhere else. I told myself that was the whole story. When I tried to be close to her, she would lean into one of those familiar excuses that were hard to argue with without sounding selfish. She was exhausted. Her brain wouldn't shut off. She felt gross after long days. She had too much on her plate. It wasn't me. It was work. It was stress. It was just a phase. I believed her because I wanted to. That's the embarrassing part, looking back. I wasn't naive because I was stupid. I was naive because I loved her enough to keep choosing the kindest explanation, even when it was making me miserable. The first month, I told myself to give her space. By the third month, I started trying harder around the house. I picked up groceries more often. I took over dinners on weeknights when she had late calls. I handled laundry before she asked. I cleaned the kitchen at night so she'd wake up to one less thing on her list. None of that was some manipulative trade for intimacy. At least I don't think it was. It was more desperate than that. I kept thinking if her life got lighter, maybe she'd come back to me on her own. Instead, the distance just settled in. By month 5, even small touches started to feel uncertain. If I put a hand on her lower back in the kitchen, she'd shift away without making it obvious. If I kissed her shoulder in bed, she'd say she was half asleep. If I tried to talk seriously about us, she would get that look that made me feel like I was bringing emotion to a logistics meeting. Calm. Controlled. Tired before I had even finished, she always had an explanation ready. Marriage changes. People go through dry spells. It doesn't mean everything is broken. Not every problem needs to be turned into a crisis. That last part got to me. I started policing my own disappointment so I wouldn't become the husband who made everything heavier. I told myself I was being mature, patient, supportive. But underneath all that, something uglier was growing. Not rage. Not yet. Just a low, private humiliation. There is something that happens to a man when the woman he loves keeps treating his need for closeness like one more demand on her energy. After a while you stop feeling rejected in the moment and start feeling edited out of your own life. That was where I lived by month 8. We still functioned well on paper. We paid bills. Remembered appointments. Split errands. Sent birthday cards. We even went out with friends and looked normal doing it. If somebody had watched us from 2 tables away in a restaurant, they probably would have called us comfortable. I knew better. Comfortable people still reach for each other without thinking. Comfortable people still look warm when they say goodnight. Megan had become efficient with me. Not cruel. Not cold enough to force the truth into the open. Just distant in a way that kept me constantly questioning whether I was being unfair for noticing. Then conference week came up, and I saw the first crack in the story she had been telling me. It was an annual industry conference downtown, a big 5-day event her company took seriously every year. She had mentioned it before in the same tone she used for taxes, airport security, and dentist appointments. Necessary. Annoying. Draining. A lot of long days and forced socializing. She made it sound like something to survive. So when she suddenly started preparing for it like it mattered personally, it hit me harder than it should have. The first sign was small. A Sunday afternoon 2 weeks before it started, she was standing in our bedroom trying on blouses with the closet doors open. Usually she bought work clothes online if she needed something and barely thought about it. This time she was actually holding things up to herself, stepping back, checking how they fit. I asked if she needed help picking one. She said she wanted to look polished because there would be clients there. That made sense. What didn't make sense was the expression on her face when she said it. There was life in it. Not just focus. Not duty. Something brighter. Over the next few days, more little things started showing up. She booked a hair appointment she had put off for months. She ordered 2 new dresses and returned one only because it didn't flatter her enough. She started doing her makeup at the bathroom mirror before work instead of throwing it on in the car like she had been doing forever. She even started skipping dessert at night and talking about feeling bloated, which would not have meant anything if it had happened at any other point in our marriage. But after 8 months of acting like even being looked at was too much effort, suddenly she cared very much how she would be seen. I noticed all of it. I also noticed what she didn't notice. She didn't see the way I watched her standing in front of the mirror in a navy dress one Thursday night, turning slightly to check the side fit. She didn't see how long I stood in the hallway before speaking because I was trying to figure out whether I had any right to feel what I was feeling. She didn't see the stupid hope that flared in me for half a second, this pathetic instinct that maybe she was trying again for us, maybe conference week had reminded her that she still wanted to feel attractive and that energy might find its way home. So I told her she looked really good. She glanced at me in the mirror and smiled, but it was the kind of smile people give after a compliment from someone they're not fully with in the moment. Appreciative. Distracted. Already gone. Then she said the week was going to be exhausting and went back to adjusting the dress at the waist. That should have answered everything, but it didn't. It just left me standing there feeling invisible in my own bedroom. The closer conference week got, the lighter she seemed. That was the part I couldn't explain away. She still came home tired, but it was a different kind of tired now. Charged, almost. Like she was depleted from something that had also energized her. She started checking her calendar more often. Smiling down at emails. Looking at her phone and then putting it face down when she realized I was nearby. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to turn my stomach. One night, 3 days before it started, she came out of the bathroom in a towel and stood at the dresser applying lotion to her legs. That image shouldn't have felt significant. She was my wife. I had seen her do ordinary things 1,000 times. But it had been so long since she'd moved around me without that invisible wall between us that I actually forgot how to breathe for a second. I stepped closer, slowly, carefully, like a man approaching something wild he didn't want to scare off. I touched her arm. She stiffened almost immediately. Not violently. Not enough for anyone else to call it rejection. Just enough. Then she said she was tired and had to be up early because Monday would be chaotic. I let go and nodded like I understood. A few minutes later she was at the mirror blow-drying her hair, leaning in, focused, alive again in that strange way she had been lately. I sat on the edge of the bed watching her through the reflection, and all I could think was that somehow conference week had gotten more of her attention in 10 days than I had gotten in 8 months. The last thing that happened before I finally stopped dismissing my own instincts was so small it would sound ridiculous to anyone who hasn't lived inside a dying marriage. It was Monday morning, the first day of the conference. Megan was dressed before 7 in a fitted cream blouse and dark slacks, with her badge lanyard laid neatly on the dresser. She had done her hair. Full makeup. Perfume, too, which she hadn't worn to the office regularly in months. I was in the doorway tightening my tie for work when I saw her looking at herself in the mirror. Not checking herself. Smiling at herself. It was brief. A private little smile. Anticipation, almost. Then she saw me in the reflection, and it vanished so fast I might have imagined it. But I didn't imagine it. And when she picked up her phone a second later and the screen lit her face before she turned it away, I felt something cold move through me for the first time. Because whatever conference week meant to my wife, it clearly wasn't just work. By the third day of conference week, I stopped telling myself I was being paranoid. That didn't mean I was ready to call Megan a liar. Not yet. But I was done pretending I couldn't feel the difference between a woman who was stressed about work and a woman who was lit up by something she didn't want to explain. The strange part was how normal everything still looked from the outside. Every morning, Megan left the house in clothes that were professional enough to explain the effort. Blouses, dresses, heels she said she only wore because she'd be on her feet around clients and executives all day. She carried the same leather tote. Wore the conference badge. Complained about traffic. If someone had dropped into our kitchen for 5 minutes before work, they would have seen a wife heading into a demanding week and a husband making coffee. What they would not have seen was the energy in her. For 8 months, I had lived with a woman who treated desire like an inconvenience and closeness like another item on an already crowded schedule. Then suddenly this same woman had no trouble getting up early, doing her hair, planning outfits, and moving through the house with this alertness that felt almost youthful. Not for me. Not with me. Just around me. That was what made it unbearable. Monday night, she came home around 8:30 and dropped her heels by the door with a groan that sounded almost theatrical. She said the first day had been chaos. Too many people, too much fake smiling, too much standing around talking to men who thought they were more impressive than they were. I nodded and asked if she wanted me to heat up dinner. She said yes, that would be great, and disappeared upstairs to shower. While I was spooning pasta into bowls, I heard her phone buzz twice on the counter where she had left it. Just two short vibrations, close together. I looked at it instinctively, then stopped myself. The screen lit up, but she had angled it away earlier, and from where I stood I could only see light, not words. A second later, I heard her coming down the stairs much faster than she had gone up. She crossed the kitchen, picked up the phone, and smiled at the screen before she seemed to remember I was there. Then she set her face back to neutral and asked if the pasta needed Parmesan. It was such a small thing. So small that if I had described it to somebody else, they probably would have told me I was reading too much into nothing. But that was how this week had started affecting me. Every tiny moment seemed to split in two. The surface version. And the version underneath it. We ate at the table like usual. She talked more than she had in months, but even that felt wrong somehow. Not because she was warm with me. Because she was charged up in general. She told me about keynote speeches, difficult clients, a woman from another company who kept trying to corner her into a partnership discussion, and a dinner the next night she said she probably couldn't avoid. Her voice had movement in it again. Expression. Animation. I kept waiting for that energy to turn toward me, even just a little, but it never did. I was just the person she unloaded the day onto before going back into herself. At one point she laughed while describing some awkward guy who had talked too long during a panel Q&A. I actually forgot what she was saying for a second because I was too busy noticing the laugh itself. I hadn't heard that version of it at home in a very long time. Later that night, when we got into bed, she rolled to her side almost immediately and said she was exhausted. The same word. The same tone. The same shutting down that had become automatic with me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easily she had come alive over dinner and how quickly she had gone flat the second the day was over and it was just us again. Tuesday was worse. She texted me around lunchtime to say the morning sessions were dragging and she was already tired of smiling at people. I read the message 3 times, not because it said anything suspicious, but because it felt like maintenance. Just enough complaint to reinforce the story. Just enough ordinary frustration to make me feel guilty for doubting her. When she came home that evening, she went upstairs before even saying hello properly. A few minutes later, she came back down changed into a different dress. I looked up from the couch and asked where she was going. She said there was a client dinner she'd mentioned the night before. I said I thought that was tomorrow. That afternoon I tried one more time to give her the benefit of the doubt. I texted and asked if she wanted to grab a drink together after conference week ended Friday. Just us. Somewhere nice. She didn't answer for 2 hours. When she finally did, she said Friday would probably be rough because everyone would want to stay late after the closing sessions, but maybe we could do something over the weekend if she wasn't dead. If she wasn't dead. That phrase sat on my screen while I pictured her trying on dresses, smiling at her phone, and standing taller in the mirror than I had seen her stand in months. Wednesday night gave me the first moment that felt truly wrong. She came home later than usual, but instead of looking drained, she looked almost overbright. Flushed cheeks. Fast movements. Eyes not quite settling on anything. She said the day had been non-stop and that tomorrow would be worse because there were back-to-back meetings, a networking lunch, and some after-hours reception she was expected to attend. I asked if she had at least gotten a chance to eat. She said barely. Then she laughed to herself at something on her phone. Not at me. Not with me. Just to herself. I don't know why that hit as hard as it did, but it did. Maybe because it was so intimate in its own way. A private little moment happening right in front of me while I stood there like furniture. I asked who was making her smile. She looked up too quickly and said nobody, just a stupid message from one of the women on her team. I nodded like I believed her. Then, while she was plugging in her phone near the kitchen island, a notification flashed across the screen before she turned it over. I only caught part of it. Can't wait for tomorrow. No name. No context. Just those 4 words. She saw my face change. I know she did. But instead of explaining, she picked up the phone, turned it face down, and asked if there was any leftover pasta. That was the moment something really shifted in me. Because whatever conference week was giving Megan, it wasn't just stress, networking, and long hours anymore. And whatever tomorrow was, someone else was looking forward to it too. I didn't ask Megan about the message. That was the first smart thing I did all week. Before that, every time something felt off between us, I went to her too early. I brought her half-formed hurt, vague discomfort, the kind of suspicion that still wanted to be talked out of itself. And Megan was good at that. She never overreacted. Never snapped. She stayed calm, tired, reasonable. She had a way of making my concern sound heavier than the thing causing it. By the end of those conversations, I usually felt like I had created a problem instead of noticed one. But that message changed something. Can't wait for tomorrow. It sat in my head all night like a splinter. Not because it proved an affair by itself. It didn't. People text all kinds of things. Work people flirt with enthusiasm all the time without crossing lines. I knew that. I told myself that. But the part I couldn't shake was how fast she had buried the screen and changed the subject. She didn't act confused. She acted practiced. So Thursday morning, I stopped looking for reassurance and started paying attention. Megan was up before her alarm. I knew because I woke to the bathroom light at 5:47 and found her already standing at the sink in one of my old t-shirts, clipping back her hair while the shower warmed. For months, this woman had dragged herself through mornings like every movement cost her something. That morning she moved with purpose. Not panic. Not stress. Purpose. I stayed in bed with my eyes half closed and listened. Cabinet door. Water running. Blow dryer. Closet hangers sliding. Drawers opening and closing. That ordinary soundtrack of getting ready somehow felt different when you knew the person making it had no energy left for you but had plenty for something else. When I came downstairs, she was already dressed. Navy sheath dress. Low heels. Makeup done more carefully than usual. Hair smoother than she normally wore it for office days. Her conference badge lay on the kitchen island beside her phone and keys. She was standing at the coffee maker staring at her phone with the faintest smile on her face. Then she noticed me. Just like Monday, the smile vanished. She asked if I wanted coffee. I said sure. She poured it for me without meeting my eyes and said today would be brutal. Back-to-back meetings. Lunch with a vendor group. Then the evening reception downtown. She said it all in that worn, professional tone I had come to hate, like she was already apologizing for how unavailable she planned to be. I asked whether the reception was at the hotel connected to the convention center. That made her glance up. Only for a second, but I saw it. Then she said yes, probably, because most of the conference events were centered there. Probably. That word bothered me long after she left. If you are expected at a formal reception after a full day of meetings, you know where it is. Or at least you know whether you know. But Megan had answered like someone buying time inside a sentence. Once she was gone, I stood in the kitchen staring at the space where she had been. The house felt too still. Too normal for how wrong everything inside me had started to feel. I went to work, but I barely worked. Instead, I started reconstructing the week in my head. Monday, too much energy for a woman supposedly dreading every minute. Tuesday, outfit change before dinner, private smile at her phone, home after 10:30 smelling like hotel air. Wednesday, laughing at messages, overbright when she got home, and then that text. By lunchtime Thursday, my mind had done what injured minds do. It started organizing details into patterns whether I wanted it to or not. Her phone face down. The new perfume. The dresses. The delayed reply when I asked about Friday. The way she had been treating conference week less like an obligation and more like something she had to survive until she could enjoy the next part. I told myself I needed one concrete thing. One real inconsistency. Something I could hold on to without feeling insane. I got it that afternoon. Around 3, one of my meetings ended early, and on impulse I checked Megan's company page online. Just curiosity at first. The conference site had a public schedule with speakers, partner organizations, panels. I clicked through it with no real expectation of finding anything. Mostly I just wanted to understand her week better. That's what I told myself. Then I saw a panel listing for Thursday evening's reception sponsor group. One of the featured partner reps was a man named Daniel Mercer from an out-of-state consulting firm. The name meant nothing to me. What mattered was the headshot. He looked familiar. Not because I knew him. Because I had seen that face before somewhere close to my life. After a few seconds, I realized where. Monday night, when Megan was showing me a funny moment from one of the conference presentation slides over dinner, a text banner had dropped across the top of her screen before she tilted it away. I hadn't caught the full message then. Just the shape of a contact photo next to it. I was almost sure it had been him. Almost sure is a dangerous thing. It's enough to ruin your peace, not enough to prove anything. So I kept digging. I checked the conference schedule again. Daniel Mercer was attached to 2 Thursday appearances, a late afternoon industry panel and the evening reception at the hotel. My pulse had started doing that hard, unpleasant thing where every beat feels physical. I wasn't proud of what I did next. I looked at Megan's social media, then the company's conference posts, then tagged pictures from the event page. Most of it was boring corporate garbage. Name badges. Smiling groups. Branded backdrops. Cocktail tables. But there, buried in a midday upload from Wednesday's networking lunch, was a photo of 6 people standing in a semicircle talking. Megan was one of them. And Daniel Mercer was standing directly beside her, angled toward her, smiling down at something she was saying. Again, not proof. But I knew my wife. I knew her public body language. Her professional smile. Her polite networking posture. I knew the difference between Megan being socially competent and Megan being lit from somewhere inside. In that photo, she looked lit. That was when the investigation stopped feeling abstract. It stopped being about whether I was insecure, needy, dramatic, unfair. It became about whether the woman I had spent 8 months being patient with was giving the part of herself I had been grieving to someone she met at a conference. When she texted around 5:30 to say the reception would go late, I didn't answer right away. Not as punishment. Because I was sitting in my car outside my office gripping the steering wheel and realizing I no longer wanted comfort from her words. I wanted reality. I wrote back 10 minutes later and told her no problem, I hoped the day was going well. She replied with a thumbs up and nothing else. That alone almost made me laugh. 8 months of distance, and somehow that stupid thumbs up landed like an insult. I drove home, showered, changed, and sat in the darkening living room with the TV on mute. I kept telling myself I was not the kind of man who followed his wife. Not the suspicious husband in some cheap story, building a case out of fragments and timing. But by then I also knew something uglier: people only get to keep their dignity when the truth arrives cleanly. Mine wasn't arriving that way. At 7:42, Megan texted that the reception had started and she might be very late. At 7:44, another message came in. Sorry. Phone dying. Talk later. That one changed everything. Because Megan never let her phone die during work events. She lived on that thing during busy weeks. Battery pack in her bag. Charger in the car. Charger in her office. For years I had joked that she prepared for dead phones the way survivalists prepared for storms. So either her phone was suddenly dying on the most social night of conference week by pure accident, or she wanted a reason to disappear without updating me. I sat there for another 20 minutes, not moving, just staring at the screen after it went dark. Then I got up, took my keys from the bowl by the door, and headed for the hotel. Halfway there, I had to pull over at a light because my hands were shaking too badly on the wheel. Not from rage. From dread. Because by then I already understood the worst part. It wasn't just the possibility that Megan might be cheating. It was the possibility that the woman who had spent 8 months making me feel unreasonable for missing her had somehow found all that missing energy again, just in a place where I wasn't invited. When I finally pulled into the hotel garage, I sat in the car for a full minute with the engine off, looking at the glowing entrance through the windshield. And then I saw Megan walk past the lobby windows. She wasn't alone. Daniel Mercer was walking beside my wife like they already belonged to the same evening. Not touching. Not doing anything obvious enough to explain why my chest went cold the second I saw them through the lobby glass. But they were moving too close, too naturally, in step with each other in that quiet way people do when the space between them has already been negotiated somewhere private. I stayed in the car for maybe 5 seconds longer than I should have. It was enough time to still turn around. Enough time to drive home, sit in the dark, and let Megan come back with another careful explanation about how long conference days are and how exhausted she was and how I was reading too much into things. But I was past explanations. I got out and crossed the garage toward the lobby entrance with that strange numb feeling people always describe after bad news, except I hadn't gotten the news yet. I was walking into it. The hotel was bright and over-air conditioned. Clean in that expensive way that makes everything feel slightly unreal. Megan and Daniel had already moved deeper inside by the time I stepped through the doors, but I caught sight of them again near the bar lounge connected to the conference hall. They were laughing. Not loudly. Not recklessly. Just the kind of close, easy laughter that made my stomach drop because I knew exactly how rare that sound had become in my own house. Daniel leaned in and said something near her ear. Megan looked down for a second, smiling in a way I had not seen directed at me in months. Maybe longer. Then his hand settled lightly against the middle of her back. That was it. No kiss. No dramatic embrace. No hotel room key dropping in slow motion. Just one small touch in a public place, and somehow it was worse than anything bigger could have been. Because it was comfortable. Casual. Repeated enough that neither of them seemed especially aware of it. That was the reveal. Not that they were sneaking around in some cartoonishly obvious way. That whatever was between them had already become natural. I don't remember deciding to move. One second I was standing there watching them, and the next Megan was turning toward me because something in my face must have reached her before my voice did. She froze. I have never seen a person's expression collapse so fast. All the conference energy, all the brightness, all the charged-up life she had been carrying around for a week disappeared in one instant. Daniel's hand dropped from her back. He looked at me, then at her, and I watched the exact second he understood what I was to her. Megan said my name like she had forgotten how sound worked. Not loudly. Just enough to confirm for all three of us that this was really happening. I walked the rest of the way toward them and stopped a few feet short. I didn't want her to get too close. I didn't want her touching me. I didn't want to smell her perfume and hear another laugh from 2 feet away. Far too late. I asked Megan one question. I asked if this was why she had been too exhausted for me for 8 months. She looked shattered for a second, then immediately tried to pull herself together. That was Megan. Even cornered, some part of her still reached for control. She said it wasn't what it looked like. That line should have made me angry, but all it did was make me tired. Because what exactly was I supposed to think it looked like? My wife, who had spent 8 months making intimacy sound like an unreasonable burden, standing in a hotel lounge during conference week with a man whose hand had just been on her back, smiling like the old version of herself I had been mourning in our bedroom for almost a year. I asked if he was the one texting her. She didn't answer. I asked if he was why conference week suddenly mattered so much. Still nothing. Daniel muttered that maybe he should go. Megan turned to him too quickly and told him to wait. That did more damage than anything else. Not because of what she said. Because of the reflex. The instinct to manage him before me. I looked at Daniel then, really looked at him. Mid-40s maybe. Confident in that polished consultant way. Expensive a watch. Conference badge still clipped to his jacket pocket. A man used to moving through hotel bars and professional events like everything around him existed to make his life smoother. And I had this sharp, ugly realization that he wasn't the center of what was happening. He was just the place she had chosen to relocate everything she kept telling me no longer existed. I turned back to Megan and asked how long. Her eyes filled immediately, but even then I couldn't tell how much of it was guilt and how much was panic at being seen. She said it hadn't been 8 months. That answer hit me harder than if she had denied everything. Because it meant she understood the question exactly. She understood the timeline. She knew what those 8 months had been for me. The silence. The rejection. The slow death of feeling wanted in my own marriage. And her first instinct wasn't to deny the betrayal. It was to negotiate the length of it. I asked when it started. She said at the conference planning stage, a few months ago. That they had been talking more. That he understood her work in a way most people didn't. That things between us had already been strained. That she hadn't meant for it to happen. There it was. The whole familiar architecture. Stress. Strain. Accident. Context. Always a structure to stand under when the truth got too exposed. I asked whether all those speeches had been real. She looked confused for a second. I told her exactly what I meant. The talks about being tired. About marriage going through phases. About not turning everything into a crisis. About how physical closeness wasn't the center of love. About how she had no energy left. I asked whether she believed any of it, or whether it was all just something she said to make me accept less while she gave the rest of herself to someone else. That was the first moment she had no words. Daniel looked away. Megan didn't. She just stood there with tears in her eyes and that terrible silence between us, and in that silence I got the one answer I had really driven there for. She knew. She had known exactly what she was doing to me. Maybe not in some villainous, movie monster way. Maybe not every day, maybe not every sentence. But enough. Enough to keep using exhaustion as a shield. Enough to let me keep blaming stress while she saved her attention, her effort, and her anticipation for conference week and for him. That was the part that hollowed me out. Not just that she wanted someone else. That she let me keep thinking the emptiness was normal. I told her I was done. She started crying for real then. Not performative. Not controlled. She stepped toward me and said we needed to talk somewhere private, that people were watching, that this was more complicated than I thought. I said no. I said the private version was what had gotten us here. Then I told her she could come home tonight if she wanted to collect things, But I was not spending another night listening to her explain away the difference between what she told me and what I had just seen. Daniel was still standing there, trapped in the awkward shame of being present for the end of someone else's marriage. I barely even registered him anymore. Megan said my name again, softer this time, like maybe she could still reach me through familiarity. But something had already gone cold inside me. I left her there. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I just walked back through the lobby, out into the garage, and sat behind the wheel for a long time before starting the car. The drive home felt eerily calm. No music. No shaking hands this time. Just that awful clarity people mistake for peace. Megan came back a little after midnight. She cried. She tried to talk. She said it had become emotional before it became physical, as though that distinction still offered either of us anything. She said she had felt disconnected from me for a long time. She said the conference brought things to the surface. I told her to sleep in the guest room. The next morning, she started trying to explain again. I stopped her. I told her I didn't need another version of the story. I had lived beside the real one for 8 months. That was the beginning of the end. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just final in the way certain truths are final once they've been seen in the light. What stayed with me afterward wasn't Daniel, or the hotel, or even conference week. It was that private smile I saw on her face in the mirror that Monday morning. Because now I understood it completely. It wasn't about work. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't professional pride. It was anticipation. And I think that is what hurts most when someone cheats after making you feel unwanted for so long. Not just that they chose someone else. That they were never empty. They were just already spending themselves somewhere you couldn't follow.